Mr. Kennedy's parents, Joseph and Rose Kennedy, are in seclusion tonight at their Hyannisport, Massachusetts home. They learned of the news of the assassination of their son from a workman at the house who heard it over the radio, and they immediately went into that seclusion. Attorney General Robert Kennedy, the president's younger brother and his closest advisor, was having lunch at his Washington home when the tragic news reached him. The president's other brother, Senator Edward Kennedy, was presiding over the Senate. When word of the assassination reached him, he rushed out of the Senate chamber, and he and his sister, Mrs. Eunice Shriver, later flew to Hyannisport to be with their parents. Another sister, Mrs. Patricia Lawford, was placed under a doctor's care at her home in Santa Monica, California, after receiving word of the assassination. Next week was to have been a big one for the Kennedy family, particularly for Caroline, who will be 6 years old on Wednesday, and for John Jr., who observes his third birthday on Monday. John, as the president called him, was to have been celebrated with his playmates at the White House on Tuesday, and the next day, Caroline was to have been the star of a big family birthday party up at Cape Cod. And all of the Kennedys have been planning to get together for their traditional Thanksgiving gathering at Hyannisport on Thursday. For the two Kennedy children and for the entire family, of course, Mr.
This is a CBS News special report. John F. Kennedy, a man of this century.
Good evening. CBS News has brought you up to date on the events of this terrible day. CBS, and indeed the whole nation, is changing its habits as a result of today's activities. There will be no commercial programming, no entertainment programming on CBS, television or radio until after the funeral of the president. Tonight it seems appropriate to take a look at the career and life of the man who was killed today. We'll look first at scenes of his childhood. John Kennedy was born in Brooklyn, Massachusetts, the second of 9 children of millionaire Joseph Kennedy. His older brother Joe was killed in World War II, and John was then the oldest of the family. He was followed by the 4 girls here with their parents. The family was completed with the addition of another girl and the 2 little boys, Teddy and Bobby. The plump, freckle-faced boy is Ted, age 7. When war came, John Kennedy volunteered. He was assigned to a Navy desk job, but he wangled a transfer to the Pacific where he commanded a PT boat. On one mission, his boat was sliced in half by a Japanese destroyer, but John Kennedy helped his crew to safety. For his heroism, he was awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal and the Purple Heart. His older brother Joe was also a hero, but he died in action. With World War II behind him, John Fitzgerald Kennedy took a brief turn as a news correspondent. He covered the United Nations meeting and the Potsdam Conference. And then politics beckoned him. In 1947, he was elected Democratic congressman from Massachusetts, and he was re-elected for 3 terms. On September 12, 1953, John Kennedy was married to Jacqueline Le Bouvier. The serious back injury that Mr. Kennedy had suffered in World War II continued to bother him throughout his life. In late 1954, he was forced to leave Washington for extensive treatment in New York City. These were scenes from that gala wedding in 1953. Here is John Kennedy going to the hospital for treatment of his back injury. was shortly before Christmas in 1954 that he left the hospital. With Mrs. Kennedy at his side, he was taken on a stretcher to New York's LaGuardia Airport for a flight to Florida and a lengthy convalescence at the Kennedy family estate at Palm Beach. 5 months later, in May of 1955, Senator and Mrs. Kennedy returned to Washington. After a busy year, the 1956 Democratic Convention was drawing near. On a visit to Los Angeles, Senator Kennedy was asked whether the issue of civil rights would split the party.
I think there's been some question about whether the Democratic Party would be split this fall. I personally do not believe it will be. I think it may be torn somewhat over this question of civil rights, but I think in the final analysis, as the Supreme Court has spoken, the decision will be accepted, and that the Democratic Party will stay united. And I think that this is fundamental to our success in November.
At the convention, Kennedy almost won the vice presidential nomination, but it went to Senator Kefauver.
There is no objection. The chair will recognize Senator John Kennedy of Massachusetts. Recognizing that this convention has selected a man who has campaigned in all parts of the country, who has worked entirely for the party, who will serve as an admirable running mate to Governor Stevenson, I hope that this convention will make F.B. Kefauver's nomination unanimous. Thank you.
The convention near miss gone by, Senator Kennedy plunged back into the Washington grind. By 1958, he was chairman of the Labor Subcommittee and then promised a labor reform bill.
This is a large assignment, but the subcommittee has now received, in effect, a mandate from the Senate to report promptly fair and effective legislation in this field. We are committed to fulfill that responsibility, and as chairman, I intend to do whatever is within my power to carry out the pledge that was given last week to members of both parties. There will be a bill in the Senate this session. That is not an opinion, I believe, but a fact.
The Kennedy snowball that started rolling in 1956 didn't stop until the night of July 13, 1960, when on the first ballot cast by the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles, Mr. Kennedy received his party's nomination for president.
Mr. Chairman, Wyoming's vote will make majority for Senator Kennedy.
The delegates on the floor are watching a tabulation by an electronic tabulator there.
Mr. Chairman,
This is the figure as shown on the floor. Kennedy, 765 votes, enough to nominate.
The Democratic Party proudly presents to the nation, to the world, to the future, our next president, John F. Kennedy.
I want to express my thanks to Governor Stevenson for his generous and heartwarming introduction. It was my great honor to place his name in nomination at the 1956 Democratic Convention. And I am delighted to have his support and his counsel and his advice in the coming months ahead. Let me say first that I accept the nomination of the Democratic Party. I accept it without reservation and with only one obligation: the obligation to devote every effort of my mind and spirit to lead our party back to victory and our nation to greatness. I am grateful, too, that you have provided us with such a strong platform to stand on and to run on. Pledges which are made so eloquently are made to be kept. The rights of man, the civil and economic rights essential to the human dignity of all men, are indeed our goal and are indeed our first principle. This is a platform on which I can run with enthusiasm and with conviction. And I am grateful, finally, that I can rely in the coming months on many others, on a distinguished running mate who brings unity and strength to our platform and our ticket, Lyndon Johnson.
That campaign in 1960 was marked by something new in American politics. An important element was 4 debates between the candidates on coast-to-coast television, an electronic nationwide debating platform.
Senator, you've been promising the voters that if you are elected president, you'll try and push through Congress bills on medical aid to the aged, a comprehensive minimum hourly wage bill, federal aid to education. Now, in the August post-convention session of the Congress, when you at least held up the possibility you could one day be president, and when you had overwhelming majorities, especially in the Senate, you could not get action on these bills. Now, how do you feel that you'll be able to get them in January if you weren't able to get them in August?
If I may take the bills, we did pass in the Senate a bill to provide a $1.25 minimum wage. It failed because the House did not pass it, and the House failed by 11 votes. And I might say that 2/3 of the Republicans in the House voted against a $1.25 minimum wage, and a majority of the Democrats sustained it. Nearly 2/3 of them voted for the $1.25. We were threatened by a veto if we passed a $1.25. And it's extremely difficult, with the great power that the president does, to pass any bill when the president is opposed. All the president needs to sustain his veto of any bill is 1/3 plus 1 in either the House or the Senate. Secondly, we passed a federal aid to education bill in the Senate. It failed to come to the floor of the House of Representatives. It was killed in the Rules Committee. And it is a fact in the August session that the 4 members of the Rules Committee who were Republicans, joining with 2 Democrats, voted against sending the aid to education bill to the floor of the House. 4 Democrats voted for it. Every Republican on the Rules Committee voted against sending that bill to be considered by the members of the House of Representatives. Thirdly, on medical care for the aged. This is the same fight that's been going on for 25 years in Social Security. We wanted to tie it to Social Security. We offered an amendment to do so. 44 Democrats voted for it. 1 Republican voted for it. And we were informed at the time it came to a vote that if it was adopted, the President of the United States would veto it. In my judgment, a vigorous Democratic president, supported by a Democratic majority in the House and Senate, can win the support for these programs. But if you send a Republican president and a Democratic majority, and the threat of a veto hangs over the Congress, in my judgment, you will continue what happened in the August session, which is a clash of parties and inaction.
Mr. Nixon, comment?
Well, obviously, my views are a little different. First of all, I don't see how it's possible for a 1/3 of a body, such as the Republicans have in the House and the Senate, to stop 2/3 if the 2/3 are adequately led. I would say, too, that when Senator Kennedy refers to the action of the House Rules Committee, there are 8 Democrats on that committee and 4 Republicans. It would seem to me, again, that it is very difficult to blame the 4 Republicans for the 8 Democrats not getting something through that particular committee.
John F. Kennedy won that election, but by a very small margin. The victory celebration came in the Kennedy family home in Hyannisport on Cape Cod in Massachusetts.
Here inside the armory, the once very junior senator from Massachusetts, now at the age of 43, the president-elect of the United States, and his wife Jacqueline go strolling down the aisle, heading for the rostrum while he receives one of the rarest of tributes, a standing ovation from newsmen. A very, very unusual thing indeed. It should be noted, too, that there are local enthusiasts from Hyannis who have somehow made their way into this armory, and they are contributing mightily to the applause. Kennedy, with his typical amazing physical ability to bounce back, looks rested. His eyes are a trifle bloodshot, but aside from that, you'd never guess that he's been through a grueling campaign and had been up most of the night following the election returns. We believe we're going to get a brief formal statement and then possibly answers to questions. The President-elect of the United States.
She's all right. She's all right, right here. Ladies and gentlemen.
I will after.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've received the following wire from Vice President Nixon. In that wire, he says, Senator John F. Kennedy, Hyannisport, Massachusetts, I want to repeat through this wire the congratulations and best wishes I extended to you on television last night. I know that you will have the united support of all Americans as you lead the nation in the cause of peace and freedom during the next 4 years. In reply to the Vice President, I sent him the following wire. Vice President Nixon, Los Angeles, California. Your sincere good wishes are gratefully accepted. You are to be congratulated on a fine race. I know that the nation can continue to count on your unswerving loyalty in whatever effort you undertake, and that you and I can maintain our long-standing cordial relations in the years ahead. Sincerely, John Kennedy. I received also a wire from President Eisenhower, which says, my congratulations to you for the victory you have just won at the polls. I will be sending you promptly a more comprehensive telegram suggesting certain measures that may commend themselves to you as you prepare to take over next January the responsibilities of the presidency, signed Dwight D. Eisenhower. And I have sent to President Eisenhower the following wire. I am grateful for your wire and good wishes. I look forward to working with you in the near future. The whole country is hopeful that your long experience in the service of your country can be drawn upon further in the years to come. With every good wish, signed, John Kennedy. One more statement. May I say, in addition to all citizens of this country, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, regardless of how they may have voted, that it is a satisfying moment to me, and I want to express my appreciation to all of them and to Mr. Nixon personally. I particularly want to thank all those who worked so long and so hard in this campaign on our behalf and who were generous to me in my visits throughout the country and who were generous enough to support me in the election on yesterday. To all Americans, I say that the next 4 years are going to be difficult and challenging years for us all.
The election may have been a close one, but I think that there is general agreement by all of our citizens that a supreme national effort will be needed in the years ahead to move this country safely through the 1960s. I ask your help in this effort, and I can assure you that every degree of mind and spirit that I possess will be devoted to the long-range interests of the United States and to the cause of freedom around the world. So now my wife and I prepare for a new administration and for a new baby. Thank you.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy was the youngest man and the first Roman Catholic ever to be elected President of the United States. He succeeded Dwight David Eisenhower, who at the age of 70 was the oldest man to serve as president. The inauguration took place on January 20th, 1961.
To the Almighty God give him, his cabinet, the Congress and courts of this country.
Richard Cardinal Cushing, the Archbishop of Boston, delivered the invocation. It was a bitter day in Washington. Almost 8 inches of snow fell on the Capitol just before the inauguration. The temperature stood at 22 degrees. The ceremony took place in front of the newly renovated east front of the Capitol building. Former President Harry Truman and the outgoing President Eisenhower were on the platform. Former President Herbert Hoover flew to Washington for the event, but the snow prevented his plane from landing. Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as vice president by the now dead House Speaker Sam Rayburn just 10 minutes before John F. Kennedy took the oath.
Implement and create true freedom as a way of life at home and abroad. For true freedom underlies human dignity and is a holy state of life. O loving Creator, ever active, ever calm.
The ceremony also produced an unforgettable incident involving the late Robert Frost as the poet sought to read his inaugural ode.
I can't see this slide. Is about the new order of the ages, that God, that in their Latin, our founding sages, God gave us his approval of. Let me have it. Easy problem. I just have to get through it as I can.
The oath of office was administered by Chief Justice Earl Warren of the United States Supreme Court.
You, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear
that you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of your ability,
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
Then the 35th president delivered a memorable inaugural address.
And John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 43-year-old former senator from Massachusetts, becomes the 35th president of the United States. The first person born in the 20th century to fill this great office.
Vice President Johnson, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chief Justice, President Eisenhower, Vice President Nixon, President Truman, Reverend clergy, fellow citizens. We observe today not a victory of party,
but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change. For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago. The world is very different now, for man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. We dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge and more. To those old allies whose cultural and spiritual origins we share, we pledge the loyalty of faithful friends. United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder. To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny. We shall not always expect to find them supporting our view, but we shall always hope to find them strongly supporting their own freedom, and to remember that in the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside.